that this House do now adjourn.
Question is House to now adjourn. Kenny MacAskill.
Bathgate no more. Linwood no more. Methil no more. Irvine no more, sang the proclaimers as they detailed the devastation caused by industrial closures and the hardship and emigration that followed. That was the 1980s as Thatcher mercilessly shut the pits, decimating Scottish industry. Not just the many individuals who lost their jobs, but entire communities and the whole country suffered as deindustrialisation took root. The country has recovered, but much has still been lost, and for some it's either irrecoverable, irreplaceable, or both. Scars remain, and pain runs deep. The devastation will neither be forgotten nor forgiven. But is it now to be a new line of Grangemouth no more? Scotland's oil refinery stands threatened. That would result in the perversity of an oil-producing nation lacking refinery capacity. I asked the House of Commons Library for research on oil-producing nations and refinery capacity. There are few nations which are oil producers and yet lack refinery capacity. Norway has 2 refineries, and of those nations which lack a refinery capacity, none are in the top 25 oil producers as Scotland is. Instead, there are countries which neither produce as much oil as Scotland, nor even have a developed economy, largely developing nations such as the Congo or Trinidad and Tobago. Not a developed industrial land like Scotland, which now faces the absurdity of being a major oil producer, yet lacking refinery capacity. If this proceeds, Scotland will be getting treated like a developing nation, its raw product taken for a song and then sold back as a refined product, but at a premium to people and nation. Exploitation is what it's called. The Rosebank field and the North Sea are to be the saviours of the UK economy, yet Scotland is to lose its refinery and face social and economic hardship as a result. Exploitation is what it is. But it's what we'll inherit if action isn't taken. Oil was first discovered in the 1960s, and it would have made Scotland one of the wealthiest countries in Europe, and it was deliberately hidden from the Scottish people. That was to downplay expectations and diminish ambitions. Norway across the North Sea has been transformed socially and economically by its oil resource, a standard of living that Scots can only look at with envy, and a sovereign wealth fund that Scotland can only dream of. Yet Scots have continually been told that the resource would soon be gone, and in 2014 at the referendum, it wasn't just running out, but even an impediment, a drain on an independent Scotland. Yet now it's at the heart of the UK's economic recovery.
Hear, hear.
Although it's been rediscovered, what's in it for Scotland? As has been said, some nations discovered oil and made the desert bloom. But Scotland discovered oil and is seeing an industrial desert created in so many of its communities, and one could well now be Grangemouth. It's not just absurd, but perverse that an oil-producing nation should have no oil refinery capacity. It's more than an economic argument. It's vital for economic security. War in the Ukraine and conflicts in the Middle East have shown the consequences. In the world in which we live, energy is essential, and securing all aspects of the supply chain is common sense. Let's look at the economic arguments and consequences of any closure. The loss and hardship would be significant for thousands, not just hundreds, sending shockwaves through industrial Scotland. The plant's workforce is 500, but there are also some 2,000 contractors attached to it. Moreover, they're skilled jobs, and the loss, as with past industry closures, will impact upon future generations. Not only have current and past generations benefited from working there, but numerous apprentices were trained there, even if ultimately plying their trade elsewhere. We already have a skills gap. This would worsen it considerably. But job losses would be significantly more than those simply at the site. Closure would reverberate across industries clustered nearby because of the refinery. If it closes, many of them will also be lost. They're in a variety of sectors, whether chemicals, plastics or other fields. That's also without even considering the huge number of individuals who depend upon the site, whether for their corner shop, as drivers or in other trades, both locally and from more distant parts. There's always a multiplier effect in any redundancy, but given the pivotal nature of the industry to the country's economy and its impact across a swathe of sectors, it would be huge. Both the town of Grangemouth and all of Scotland would suffer. The knock-on effect echoing across the entire country, as industrial closures did decades ago, whether in the pits or car plants. Grangemouth refinery is a national asset upon which our energy security as well as our industrial economy depends. It's why it must be retained. There's been a refinery there for a century, currently providing for 70% of Scottish filling stations, as well as for many in Northern England. It's also the primary supplier of aviation fuel for Scotland's airports. Not an insignificant issue in an island nation with many remote island communities. Energy security, as I've stated, demands it. Of course, we are seeking to transition from a carbon economy, but it requires to be both a just transition and at a pace allowing our economy and society to adapt. The cumulative impact of closure might not be the 4% loss of GDP suggested by Petro-Ineos, but even the 0.25% or 0.3% loss of GDP suggested by the Fraser of Allender Institute would be damaging enough. Yet where's the outrage and anger? Where's been a ministerial statement here at Westminster or the call to action at Holyrood? Instead, there's been silence or sanguinity, hoping that it might just not happen, or even more disgracefully, quiet resignation to its fate. Thankfully, Unite the Union and the workforce are strenuously making the case, and I'm grateful for their assistance and input. Closure is still only potential rather than actual, but the threat is real, and there has to be a balance with causing unnecessary alarm and taking urgent action. Because unless action is taken now, then disaster will befall Grangemouth refinery, and the impact will be grave upon all workers, the wider community and the entire nation. What needs done? Ownership has changed over the years and profitability has been affected by underinvestment. No blame can attach to the current or past workforce. Responsibility may also rest with previous owners other than PetroChina and Ineos currently in charge. But there are steps which can and must be taken which will address current profitability and that will buy time so that a transition can take place both at the site as across our economy. Moreover, there are also actions which will increase capacity and thus both profitability and productivity. That means linking Scotland's oil refinery with Scotland's oil production. Finally, there's that just transition and the need to prepare for the new world, but which can and must be done at this site. Let's examine those three aspects that must be done. Firstly, there's the need to fix the hydrocracker at the refinery. Its currently inoperability is impacting upon profitability. Restarting it would increase the profitability threefold. That's significant and would allow for an extension of life at the plant, even without any additional steps being taken. It's estimated that it would cost between 60 and 80 million to do so, but it must be done. The money must be found, whether from Westminster, Holyrood or the existing business. Surely from amongst all three, finance can be found. It's a small cost for such a huge asset and one that's essential, not just to our economy, but our society. There is, after all, a moral as well as financial economy, and the price mustn't be paid by the individuals and the communities who would suffer by its loss. As well as restarting the hydrocracker, there should also be an increase in capacity and what's refined. It will surprise many that North Sea oil isn't refined at the Grangemouth refinery. That despite the pipeline for the Forties fuel coming ashore at Cruden Bay and then being pipelined on to Grangemouth. Almost all the product refined at the plant is brought in on tanker from elsewhere. It comes in on ships and goes away in trucks. Meanwhile, North Sea oil is transported to other refineries, whether in the UK or abroad. That must end. It has always been absurd, but now it's criminal. The Forties fuelled pipeline, which last year moved approximately 40% of the UK's oil from the North Sea, must be refined at Grangemouth. It requires technological and engineering changes, but they must be done. As Rosebank comes on stream and as the Forties continues to flow, refining it must be at Grangemouth. Scotland is entitled to expect no less from its resource. The Prime Minister has trumpeted the necessity of continuing to exploit North Sea oil, and whilst I can take issue with the extent and pace of it, I agree with the logic. It's absurd to import oil when you have your own resource. Not only is it economic self-harm, but it's environmentally daft to transport it across the seas when it's off your shores. Why then spew out the significant fumes of a supertanker by the hundreds of thousands when you can pipe it ashore and refine it there? But to achieve that requires ensuring that the oil is refined here, which it currently isn't. The hypocrisy of the Prime Minister's position has been exposed by those who oppose development. Their arguments have legitimacy unless steps are taken to ensure that the refining of the resource is also here, not the environmental double whammy of transporting our product far away for refining and having these ships cross with others importing refined product from elsewhere. The Forties fuelled oil supply must be refined at the site, and the technical and engineering work to achieve that must be done. It's bad enough that ownership of the Rosebank field lies with a Norwegian state energy company, but to have that product refined abroad compounds the agony and the absurdity. Finally, there needs to be preparation for the transition from fossil fuels to renewables. Steps must be taken to prepare the site for biofuels. They will be required in the future, and the sites for the refining them need established. It makes sense securing the short-term future of the site by the restarting of the hydrocracker, similarly extending the refinery's capacity by ensuring that North Sea oils processed there is essential. Finally though, steps need taken towards that transition that humanity is requiring to make for the sake of life itself, not just for the planet. But it must be more than just warm words and empty rhetoric. It requires preparation and action. Making Grangemouth a future site for biofuels refining must be part of that. In summary, Mr Deputy Speaker, securing the refinery is essential for Scotland, not just Grangemouth. The arguments for it are social, economic, as well as environmental, and the case is overwhelming. It's simply perverse that an oil-producing nation should have no refinery capacity, or that an industrial desert be created where a natural bounty should see a country and its communities bloom. It's for those reasons that I ask the Minister to meet with me and workers' representatives from the site. Additionally, and most essentially, I ask him to ensure that these three steps are taken. Firstly, to ensure that funds are found to restart the hydrocracker. Secondly, to ensure that oil from the Forties field and which is piped to Grangemouth is refined there, and that new developments such as Rosebank will also be refined there, negating the environmental harm of the transshipment inward and outward of oil. Finally,
on that point, just before you finish this?
By all means.
Can I commend the Honourable Gentleman for East Lothian for bringing this forward, and does the Honourable Member agree that the East Lothian oil refinery at Grangemouth is a necessity not only for Scotland but for all of the United Kingdom, and must stay open, not in opposition to renewable targets but in partnership with them?
Yes, I agree with that, which is why I come to my final point, which is to ensure that as we transition, which we have to, actions at the site are taken for that new future by ensuring a biofuels capacity at the site. We simply cannot have the absurdity of an oil-producing nation lacking a refinery capacity, never mind the perversity of the oil it produces being shipped across the seas for refining.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and may I begin by thanking the Honourable Member for East Lothian for securing this important debate, and for colleagues across the chamber joining it. I recognise that news of a plan to transition Grangemouth refinery into an import terminal is undoubtedly a matter of concern for many people. However, I want to make clear that the government is committed to ensuring continued fuel supply, protecting jobs and creating opportunities in Scotland and across the UK. Primary responsibility of my department is for the energy security of the whole of the UK, including Scotland. On the 29th of November, I met with the Scottish Cabinet Secretary Neil Gray, and we agreed that both of our governments would continue to work closely on this issue through fora such as the Grangemouth Future Industries Board. Scotland and the UK will continue to have reliable supplies of fuels after this transition if it goes ahead, in line with the UK government's commitment to energy security and resilience. Before going into specifics, I want to recognise that Grangemouth refinery has been an important asset for the fuel supply of Scotland and the local economy since it opened in 1924. No final decision on the future of the refinery has been made, but the planning for the conversion of the refinery into an import terminal is a commercial decision by its owners, Petro Ineos. This reflects their view of the economic sustainability of the refinery in the context of expected refining margins, domestic demand projections and international competition. Even in this macroeconomic context, the UK and Scottish governments are working together to understand all the options for the future of the refinery, and happily give way to the Honourable Lady.
I thank the Minister for giving way on this. Grangemouth is, as he has just said, a vital economic factor for the immediate vicinity, for my constituency in Edinburgh West, indeed for all of Scotland. Does the government recognise the importance, and will it continue to support the importance of Grangemouth in the future success of the Green Freeport, of which it is a vital component, not least because of its capability of future production of sustainable aviation fuel, on which so many developments are predisposed?
The lady is absolutely right to champion the opportunity. I mean, there are so many opportunities going forward, which is why, if the decision is made around refining there, I believe that will be, it will be countermanded multiple times over by the opportunities in issues like SAF, as the Honourable Lady mentions. And Scotland and that area have such a role to play in delivering and continuing the UK's leadership, which is a global leadership in having cut emissions. We celebrate recently that we've halved emissions, the first major economy on earth to halve emissions, and of course we're more ambitious going forward than any other major economy on earth, and Scotland has such a vital role to play. Despite encouragement, I'll give way to my honourable friend.
My friend makes an excellent point about the jobs are very important at Grangemouth, the skills that have been developed over the years, 100 years this year, since it first came on stream. But does he also agree with me and most of the oil and gas industry that are adamant that the skills and technologies and supply chains that supply not just Grangemouth, the refinery, but the whole North Sea offshore industry are not just vital for managing the energy security of today, but the energy transition for tomorrow as well?
My honourable friend, who's a great champion of those workers in the oil and gas industry, it's an integrated energy industry now, and I think he may have seen the recent research suggesting that 90% of those currently employed in oil and gas have transferable skills to the green transition, which we can positively expect to see many more jobs in future if we maintain the strength of that industry today. That's why it's so disappointing that parties opposite oppose new licensing of oil and gas when it's vital to maintain those jobs, maintain that capability. And that's why the Alba party is more constructive in this respect than others sitting on those benches opposite. We're working closely with both the company and the Scottish Government to ensure a managed transition of the site, support its workers and ensure Scotland's fuel supply remains resilient. Petro Ineos' plans will ensure that the Grangemouth site will be able to maintain Scotland's fuel supply through imports. Adapting the infrastructure to accommodate imports in larger tankers, particularly for diesel at Finnet on the west coast of Scotland, will ensure that the import terminal has greater flexibility and maintain robust fuel security. I recognise that consumers may be worried that increasing the UK's reliance on imported fuel products could increase the price that they pay at the pump. I want to provide reassurance that this conversion is unlikely to drive up the price of petrol and diesel for the Scottish consumer. Fuel prices are mainly driven by international petroleum product markets and exchange rates, and imports into other sites, such as Clydebank, are already competitive in the Scottish market. I also want to acknowledge that the announcement of the conversion will be concerning to the refinery's employees and their families. We remain in close contact with the Scottish Government to mitigate impacts on jobs and the local economy. And as part of our commitment to levelling up, the UK Government is already supporting the Falkirk Council area through the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. Their allocation of more than £6.1 million will deliver a range of interventions that support local businesses, communities, people and skills. We're also supporting Falkirk Council with £40 million of UK Government investment through the Falkirk City and Regional Growth Deal, which is supporting a range of locally driven projects that will create high-value jobs to help boost the local economy. We're also working with the Scottish Government to deliver the fourth green Freeport that covers the area. The Freeport aims to drive a transition to net zero by 2045 by attracting up to £6 billion worth of investment and creating approximately 50,000 jobs, generating an estimated £4.2 billion in additional gross value added in the first 5 years. I'll give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
The Minister has given a comprehensive reply, but I think the issue about the Green Freeport is really important, and I think you've mentioned that you've been in discussion with the Scottish Government and others in the Grangemouth area. Would you make a direct plea to the Green Port as well to make sure that they are fully involved in any potential reinvestment in this facility at Grangemouth, which has been part of the industrial heritage of Scotland and industrial scene in Scotland for a very, very long time? And I think that would be a very valuable contribution if the Government could make such an intervention.
Minister.
Well, as the Honourable Gentleman will be aware through contracts for difference, for so many other policy announcements from the UK Government, we are driving enormous growth in jobs in the green sectors. We're expecting it to grow to 480,000 jobs by the end of this decade. And as I say, as a global leader in decarbonisation, I think Scotland is going to, and that area in particular, has an enormous amount to offer, and there's huge opportunities coming forward. And we will, of course, be publishing next year a green jobs plan, working across with industry to identify the pressure points and the opportunities going forward. The Government remains absolutely committed to supporting the North Sea oil and gas sector, and the conversion of the refinery into an import terminal isn't expected to impact significantly on North Sea production. That's because only a very small amount of oil refined at Grangemouth comes from the North Sea currently. Indeed, since the start of 2022, Grangemouth has received on average less than 10% of its supply from the North Sea via the Forties pipeline, which the Honourable Gentleman referred to. This North Sea crude would be made available to the open market via the terminal at Hound Point, alongside the rest of the Forties blend production. And I can also confirm there will be no impact on gas supplies. I want to reassure the House that the Government will continue to back North Sea production by granting licences for new projects such as the Rosebank field development. Developments such as Rosebank will continue to strengthen our energy security, support the transition to net zero and create new jobs and opportunities. Rosebank, for example, is expected to be significantly less emissions intensive than previous developments, which will help the UK reach its ambitious targets for net zero. Its operator, Equinor, estimates that it will produce oil at around 12 kilograms of carbon dioxide per barrel, compared to an offshore production average of more than 20 kilograms of carbon dioxide per barrel. So it is already a much more efficient production, and that's before. If electrification were to go ahead, it would be significantly lower again. In addition, the Rosebank project will provide an investment of £6.3 billion. £6.3 billion in UK-based businesses, support around 400 UK-based jobs and add around £24 billion to the UK economy across the project's lifetime, according to its operator. And yet, that licence finds itself opposed by the party opposite, even as it supports jobs and it helps us green the basin. I want to finish by reiterating to the House the Government's commitment to backing North Sea oil and gas sector to protect our energy security, attract investment and create opportunities for communities in Scotland and across the UK. And of course it's a declining basin. It's expected to fall with new licences at 7% a year. It's New licences are not part of increasing production, because we're not going to have increased production. It's about managing the decline, doing so in a way which brings forward developments like Rosebank with lower emissions than the alternative. That's why it's the right thing to do by the environment, however counterintuitive that may seem. It's also the right thing to do for jobs, for the maintenance of the capability, for the long term, as we go through the transition and the green economy grows in the Freeport as well as elsewhere. The UK Government will continue to work closely with the Scottish Government on this issue to ensure that when the time comes, there's a just transition of Grangemouth into an import terminal, if that is the decision made, and to ensure that fuel supplies for Scotland and the UK are maintained. The Government will also continue to support economic development in the local area to ensure there is a just transition for the workforce. So I look forward to continuing to engage with honourable members and the honourable gentleman in particular on this vitally important issue. Thank you.
The question is that this House to stand adjourned. Does many of that opinion say aye? Aye. Contrary, no. The ayes have it. Order, order.